Alright, let's continue 1.3 here. We're going to talk about how we can find a midpoint and using a midpoint. So far we just talked about lines going straight left and right and going up and down. Well, what if we have a line at an angle? How can we find the midpoint then? So let's take a look here. This is kind of an explanation of where we get the midpoint formula from, and so for some people it helps to kind of see this explanation. So let's say I have 2 points, A with x1, y1, and B with x2, y2, and they're just anywhere on the coordinate plane. So I'm just going to draw them here. Put B over here, and I'll put A down here. And remember, B is going to be x2, y2, and A is going to be x1, y1. And then we just connect the dots. Well, how could we find out where that midpoint is? And we know it's somewhere in the middle, but where exactly is it? Well, what we could do is we could draw a triangle again. We'll find out triangles are like the key to everything in geometry. And if we think about this, if I was to go straight down from B, that would mean that my x value doesn't change at all because I just went down. So this point here would have the x coordinate of x2. It would have the same x coordinate. And it would have the same y coordinate as over here, so it would be y1. Okay. So that means the midpoint here is going to just be y2 and y1 added together and divided by 2. It's like the average of these two heights will give us the middle height. So that's all we do. We just take y1 plus y2, add them together, and then divide by 2. That gives us the middle point there. And the same thing here. If I want the middle point here, I take my x's. So I have my x2 and my x1. I just add those together, and that gives me a middle point here. And if I was to just kind of draw a line straight up and down and a line straight left and right, that would give me my midpoint. And there's how I get my x coordinate, and there's how I get my y coordinate. Well, that's where the midpoint formula comes from. So I write it as xm equals x1 plus x2 over 2, and ym equals y1 plus y2 over 2. So that's how we get the x, that's how we get the y, and that's how we'll get the midpoint coordinate. So here's the formula like you see it in the book, but I want you guys to be using this formula here. So let's do this first problem. It says find the midpoint of AB. Well, we have to first find the coordinates of A and B. So let's take a look. A looks like it is at -3, 4, and B looks like it's at 2, 1. Well, let's label all these guys. So let's call this x1, y1, x2, y2. And let's just rewrite those formulas. Right? So I know that xm equals x1 plus x2 over 2. Plugging everything in. I don't know my xm, that's what I'm trying to find, so I leave that as my variable. x1 is -3, and x2 is 2, all divided by 2. xm equals -3 plus 2 is -1 over 2. So there's my x coordinates, -1/2. Let's do the y now. ym equals y1 plus y2 over 2. Well, y1 is 4, and y2 is 1. All over 2. Ym equals 4 plus 1 over 2, so ym equals 5 over 2. So I'm going to write my final answer as -1/2, comma, 5/2. And there we go. That's my answer. There's the midpoint. So the midpoint's somewhere right about there. And there you go. That's how you do it. Just plug it in, you get your x coordinate, you get your y coordinate, and then you put it in as an ordered pair. Alright, let's go to the next page. Okay, practice number 6. I want you guys to find the midpoint. So do what I did, label these points, write your equation out, and then try and solve it. And I'll put the answer up in just a second. So if you want to try and work it out and pause the video while you do so, you should do that now because the answer's coming right up here. Okay, I did a whole bunch of work and I thought I was recording, so I'm sorry guys, but we'll zoom in on here. So one of the first things I did is I labeled my points, x1, y1, x2, y2, and then I wrote my equations out here, and I plugged in my values to each equation according to how I labeled them, and I solved, and I got 9/2 for my xm and 0/2, or just 0 for my y. So there's my answer, 9/2 comma 0. For this next one, for example number 7, I labeled them again. My labels are a little bit off. I don't know. I had a little iPad error here, but x1, y1 goes to this guy, and x2, y2 goes to these ones. So I rewrote my equations. A plus 3, or xm equals x1 plus x2, and there I am plugging those things in, divided by 2, and my ym equals b plus 4b, because that's my y1 and my y2. And then when I solve that down, I just get 2a, and I solve this down, I get 5b over 2, and there's my answer, 2a, comma 5b over 2. So that might be confusing, because you're like, why do I have variables in there? It doesn't really matter that you have variables in there. We're just checking to make sure you could take any value and plug it into the equations that we've been using here. The equations, of course, that I'm talking about is these guys. Xm equals x1 plus x2 over 2, and ym equals y1 plus y2 over 2. All right. That being said, let's take a look at number 8. We have something different going on here. Look at what they say. They say, hey, M is the midpoint of CD, and they want you to find the coordinates of point D. Well, before we were always finding the midpoint. But now they're giving us the midpoint, see the midpoint's right there, and one of the endpoints, and they want us to find D up here somewhere. So, got to be careful here. One of the first things I'm going to do, let me move this over so that it looks better. X, M, Y, M. Since M is the midpoint, and they told me that, I'm going to label these coordinates as XM and YM, or the midpoint. And I'm going to call these guys X1 and Y1. And I rewrote my equation right here and right here. And now I'm plugging things in. I'm going to do that all over again, so I'm going to pause the video and give me just a second to clean this up. Okay, so here's my equations, and here's how I plug everything in. Check it out. My XM goes right here, so that's where I plug in -1. My X1 goes right here, so I plug that in, and then I'm left with just an X. Well, it was the X2, but the only reason why I'm numbering all these and putting letters next to them up here is because there's so many X's. Once I plug things in and there's only one X left, I don't really need those numbers anymore. I could leave it if I want, but we don't really need it. We know we're solving for D, so as long as we know this is going to be for point D, that's all that really matters. So, same thing over here with the Y. Here's my YM, and here's my Y1, and I just made it a Y instead of a Y2, and now we're going to solve this thing. So what we do is we multiply both sides by 2 here, so that we get a -2 over here, and just a 1 plus X here, because these guys will cancel each other out. Subtract 1, and we get a -3 equals X. Alright, and over here, I'm going to do a similar thing. We're going to multiply both sides by 2. So we get a 2 over here, and get these 2's to cancel out. -3 plus Y. Add 3, cancels, and we get 5 equals Y. So that means my final answer, or my other endpoint, is -3 comma 5. That's the point we're looking for, -3 comma 5. That's D. Alright. Take a look at this problem, practice number 8A and practice 8B. You're going to do the same thing. Look at what I did first. I labeled XM and YM. So I went ahead and showed you where the XM and the YM is, because they say M is the midpoint. So that's my XM and my YM, and that's my XM or YM for that problem. And this is going to be X1, Y2, X1, Y2. And what I want you guys to do, plug it into the equations like we said, and find the endpoint. Do it for both of these. And then check the video, and I'll have the answers up there. So you may want to pause, because the answers are going to be up there in just a second. So go ahead and pause the video now. Okay, so for 8A you should have gotten 4, -3, and for 8B you should have gotten 7, 9. If you didn't get those, I would suggest that you go back up and check how I did this problem and make sure you did all the same steps. Labeled things correctly, plugged them in correctly, and then solved correctly. That's all the stuff you need to do. All right, and for the summary, just want you thinking about this. Mainly what I want here is I have a segment, and I know that M is the endpoint, but I want to think of as many ways as possible to prove or to argue that M is definitely the midpoint. So try and think of how you could demonstrate to me that M is definitely the midpoint. All right, that's it for 1.3.